Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, September 17th. It is 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the traditional territories of the Sechelt Nation and Squamish Nation. And given how we are actually taking part in this, we are actually scattered over those territories. So we have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or deletions? Director McMahon.
Thank you for prodding me. I have one item of new business to raise.
All right. Did you want to give us a hint as to what it's about?
HR metrics.
HR metrics. Perfect. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you. So a motion, please, to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. I'm going to make a note for those in attendance and for directors and staff. There is a meeting scheduled as part of UBCM with Flinward this afternoon. It is starting at 3 p.m. We need to be on that call early, so we will be recessing this meeting from 2:45 to 3:30. And I actually have an alarm set, so I don't forget. So when we hit that, we'll finish whatever business we're dealing with at that point, and then we will recess. So we'll move into item number 1 on our agenda. Budget project status report. And did you need to say anything to introduce this? Anybody? Or you just want us to head right in? Yep.
Can we move to receive all the reports, please?
Please, thank you. Motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded, all in favor. Thank you. I'm glad you guys are keeping me honest here. All right, Annex A, Budget Project Status Report, September 2020. Let's go page by page. So, page 2. Any questions from directors? No questions on page 2. Move on to page 3. The staff's doing a fabulous job in keeping us apprised. It's good. Page 4. Nothing on page 4. Page 5. Director McMahon.
Right. I'm just wondering when we'll see the report on the Wood Creek Park sand filter.
And staff?
It's about to be finalized, so it will be October, but I guess it will be November IC, one of those 2 months.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Sorry, I was busy looking at my screen instead of unmuting. On line number 67, we're getting some community park signage, and they really sound like good things, and you got a local woodworker doing it. I was just wondering, though, where the signs were going.
Okay, and staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Those signs are the entry signs for most of our parks, and it covers off most of the regional parks. And I think that I think we're 75% progress. I think there are only a handful left to be installed. So, for example, Pender Hill, John Daly would have new signs that would have been installed under this project in the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on page 5? Moving on to page 6. Director Lee?
Yes, let me just go over and find which line. It's line 82, and it's bylaw 422 update, which is rates and operations for our water supply and distribution. But we're procuring something. I was trying to figure out what we're procuring.
Staff?
Thank you very much. The project consists of the assistance of a consultant to help us with this update, and the benefit of having a consultant here is in part that a consultant often can bring some insight and experience with this kind of bylaws in other jurisdictions.
Follow-up, or you?
No, that's fine. I guess we need some specific expertise we don't have in-house, in other words. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on page 6? Move on to page 7. Page 8. And into page 9. Director Toth.
Thank you. Let me just see if I can find the line number here. Line 122 talks about a summer student with the position filled as of September 1st. I'm just wondering about the feasibility of a 4-month summer student with the position having been filled September 1st, with post-secondary being all over the place. Thanks.
Thank you. And GM Rosenboom, looks like you.
Yeah, looks like we have different opinion of what summer is, but it is somebody, it's not post-secondary, it is actually a student from post-secondary education, so it is, the position is filled with somebody with a significant amount of experience. And it's not really a high school student or somebody. So the person is filled and will be here for 4 months, and it's just still being a student, but about not to be a student anymore. Recent grad.
Okay. Any further questions on page 9? Any questions on page 10 on the completed projects? Director Lee?
I was pleased to see that we found water at 300 feet in Cliff Gilker Park. Is 370 feet quite an unusual depth, or is that something we expected when we started looking for it?
Do you know the number on that? I think GM Rosenboom, you found that? Which number was that, Director Lee?
It was number 10 on the complete.
Okay, okay. Oh, this would be GM Hall, sorry.
Well,
Sort of.
I can offer insight into how the project went, but I can't answer the question of whether that's unusually deep. But staff were prepared to drill to the depths that the budget of the project allowed, and was practical for finding water, and just about maxed out both the driller's capability and the project budget in order to reach this. So this was as deep as we were prepared to look in the park. Thanks.
Go ahead.
And to answer the question, the other part of the question, it's not uncommon that this kind of depth is required, especially given how far up the hill you are compared to the ocean.
Oh, you just muted yourself, Director Lee.
Oh, wrong way around. Did we get lots of water, or did we get just enough water, or can we start selling it?
Thank you. Well, the goal of the project was to identify whether there was enough water for park purposes, and the exact figures and a final report are being developed. It was just a preliminary test, so we'll have to carry on with the next steps to see about developing the well for use to serve the park. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Toth.
Thank you. GM Hall basically preempted the question I was going to tack onto that. So there will be a report forthcoming with sort of next steps on this. It's not like the system is ready to license, drop a pump in it, and let's get watering. We've got additional steps to do here.
Exactly, Director. The steps to bringing a well to production, whether it's to use for irrigation or it's a major well like the one that's being developed at Church Road, are relatively the same. So there are a number of them, and park staff are prepared to work through them step by step. Thanks.
All right, before we move on to the next agenda item, are there any that, on any of the pages that we skipped over that you needed to go back to and address before moving on? Doesn't seem like it. Thank you very much, staff. Thank you for all your information, for keeping that. I know it takes a lot to keep that updated. We really appreciate the effort and the work that you put into that. So we'll move on to Annex B, Strategic Plan Update. And we'll turn this over to our CAO.
Thank you very much, Chair. The Strategic Plan Review Update was held on September 3rd and 4th in compliance with the SCRD Strategic Planning Board policy. It was good to work with Facilitator Mark Brown again, and I know, speaking on behalf of the senior leadership team, it was a really positive experience getting to really roll up our sleeves and engage with the board. Huge thank you to everyone for their participation. In a lot of ways, this was also a bit of a soft opening, as it were, for the Gibsons and Area Community Center and Arena, as we used their meeting room as at the very beginning of Rec Restart. And for Ian and the whole Recreation Facilities and Services staff, a big thank you for having that space available to us. We'll be should it be adopted and approved as amended, we'll be working on the actual changes to the InDesign document, and really enjoyed the experience. And I'll turn it over to any questions or comments you have.
Thank you. Directors. Director McMahon. And then Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was a good process. It was good to get together with everybody in person for a change, because there is such a thing as too much Zoom. And the hardest point was picking priorities. When we had to do the dot-mocracy exercise and pick priorities, I wanted to prioritize everything, but I guess that's not actually prioritizing. So we had to come up with our top picks, and it wasn't easy.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
The short is I like it, no, it was great, and I really appreciate the report. For the public to see this, I think is terrific. You know, to put it into the public record, the notes, and the notes are fantastic. So just thanks very much.
Thank you, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. I'd like to just echo thanks to the senior leadership team, the entire senior leadership team, as well as to Tracy Hanks for being our support on that day, and also to Mark Brown as a facilitator. I think it all went really well. Really appreciated having that in-face discussion. That is so incredibly valuable when we have been not able to meet in person for so long, and I do appreciate having this in the public realm. The level of increase of transparency is fantastic. So, just much gratitude for having the space and place to do this. So, thank you.
And Director Toth.
Thank you. I did actually have one question where my notes didn't quite match the notes that came forward, and perhaps I miscomprehended or what have you. The page at the top of page 19 of our agenda, we talk about renaming asset management to asset stewardship, and it mentions there all three tactics were being renamed, and I thought we'd had some discussion on whether all three were appropriate to rename. So unfortunately, I don't have my notes in front of me right now to reference, but I just wanted to confirm that that was indeed correct.
Okay, and CEO?
I can go back through the notes with Tracy and verify that and get back to you. I don't have the notes, the detailed notes in front of me either right now.
Thank you. So would we move this, I mean, if we approve this at this point, you would come back with a change if we needed that before it was redone?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. GM Rosenboom, you got a point?
I think the point I would like to make is that in only one of the three tactics, the word asset management is included. So either way, only one of the three tactics. If you list one or you list all three, only one there's a word, so it will end up being the same.
Okay, any other questions, comments about the process, about the report? So there is a recommendation on page, yep, Director Pratt.
I'd like to move the recommendations on page, sorry,
12,
page 12, please.
Is there a seconder? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff. It was fabulous. And we're going to move on to grant status update, Annex C, pages 23 through 27. And Tina, you're taking this? Thank you.
Thank you. So the grants report is provided in March and September of each year and provides information on recent notifications, pending applications, grants in progress, and completed grants. At present, there are several open intakes under separate funding streams. Staff are currently reviewing opportunities that align with the grant program guidelines and will bring forward recommended projects to proceed to the application stage at a future committee in October. The most eminent opportunity is with the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, which has an application deadline of October 1st. Based on program guidelines and project readiness, staff recommend applying for the Seashell Aquatic Center's Building Envelope Review and Energy Efficiency Improvement Project. The grant covers up to 73% of eligible cost, and there is currently $250,000 in the financial plan for this project. This will satisfy the SCRD's requirement to demonstrate its commitment to covering non-shareable costs, and additional wording to suggested resolution to reflect the funding commitment is required. I think we provided that to you, Chair. So staff are available for any other further questions that might arise out of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors. Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just looking at some background about what is the problem with the building envelope that needs work, I guess. And I see it going back a number of years, but just a little bit of background on why this needs to be done.
And Tina? Or GM Hall, whoever?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So staff are aware that the insulating panels that clad the building are not performing to specification. And so consequently, there's occasionally condensation on the inside of the panels that degrades things within the building, and we're not as energy efficient as the building should be for the panels. And so this project would attempt to find out why through some invasive methods of exploration, and then attempt to remedy the problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this would go back to the original construction and was probably noted within the first year of the building operation. I'm guessing there's not much would change with the building envelope, and the systems are in place and they're running, so it's probably been known for some time.
It is a long-standing concern, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions on the report? Director McMahon?
I just had a comment. I was in attendance at the Scredo meeting the other night, and the Solar Association has been in touch with Scredo about their potential solar project on the roof of the SCRD's rec center in Gibson's, and Scredo is going to give them a bit of a hand because they're trying to find a way to find some funding without impacting our staff a whole bunch. So that's just an update.
Thank you. Directors, any other questions on any of the information in the report? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, just trying to get a sense of the SERD commitment. We got 73% of this amount. So I'm trying to square the 250,000, the 73%, and the 1 million. I'm just trying to see how those pieces are sequenced in a line and what the SERD's commitment is. Like, are we going to have to pay more here, I guess, is the short question.
Okay, so this actually came up during our agenda review, because given the short time frame, we don't actually have finalized numbers on this. So we need to figure out how do we indicate that we have allocated 250,000, but we don't know if that's enough. So staff reached out to the grantors basically, and they provided us with some wording. So the recommendation that's here, we would add to and say, and further that SERD board supports the project and commits to its share of up to 250,000 of the project, as well as cost overruns. They're okay with that, and it allows us to apply for what we need and gives us the flexibility, which we would then have to come back with recommendations once we have final numbers. Okay, Director McMahon.
I can't resist asking the question, although nobody may have the answer. Given that this is a long-standing problem with the building that was probably discovered, within a short time of the building being opened, why did we not pursue repairs with the contractor?
Who wants to take that one?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just assure the committee that staff did. Staff did take it up with the contractor. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any further questions or comments? All right. So we have a recommendation on page 23 with the addition as provided by the grantor and through our staff. Would anyone like to make that recommendation? Director Hiltz. So Director Hiltz is making the recommendation that the SCRD submit an application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, British Columbia, Community Culture and Recreation Infrastructure for the Seashelt Aquatic Center Building Envelope, review an energy efficiency improvement project, and further that SCRD board supports the project and commits to its share of up to $250,000 of the project, as well as cost overruns. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff. I know what we're noticing, and this is for the public more so, what we're noticing is, given the COVID situation that we're in, the federal government has identified that they are going to try to put forward grant opportunities for municipalities that can be moved on fairly quickly in order to provide some economic stimulus to economies and communities. What that means, though, is that our turnaround time on our side is very quick, doesn't necessarily follow our processes. So this is one of them. It was only announced a few weeks ago, and staff are moving on it fairly quickly. So it's good that you're getting this moving forward. Thank you for that. All right, next item, Annex D, Financial Sustainability Policy Review, and over to Tina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Financial Sustainability Policy was first adopted in January 2011 and was updated in March of 2016. The original purpose of the policy was to address challenges in relation to maintaining stable taxation. However, the goal of the policy has evolved to ensure the SRD is effectively planning for sustainable service delivery. The purpose of this report is to review the policy and provide proposed amendments for the board's consideration. These include aligning the policy with the current board's strategic plan, reflect updated processes within the policy statements, include language associated with asset management and service planning, aligning operating and capital renewal funding sources, and lastly, incorporate changes related to the new public sector accounting standards. A copy of the draft revised policy is attached for reference, and staff are available for any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And directors, any questions? Director Lee, and then Director Hiltz.
Yes, I've been following the wastewater, and by the way, it's well done. I'm enjoying it, but it brought a question to mind, and that is, as we accumulate capital, we're actually targeting 100% of the investment to be accrued. I've been noticing we get grants all the time, but I suspect that the policy doesn't allow us to gamble that we might get a grant or not. I was just wondering if someone could kind of set my mind at ease with that one. Is it like it's something we should put in the policy, or is it just something that doesn't belong in a policy, or what?
Tina?
Yeah, I think that most certainly in doing any kind of financial planning, that is one of the considerations, is the balance between appropriate reserve funding, debt funding, and the potential of having grants to fund some of the capital projects. Because you can't really anticipate for that, and sometimes the magnitude of these projects are quite extensive, and so if the grant wasn't available, I'm going to use an example in the wastewater services. If Square Bay had not received the grant for the replacement of that particular plant, it would have been extremely challenging to fund that over $800,000 project for that very small local service area. So without the grant, we would have been, or those ratepayers would have had a large fee to pay or a very large debt servicing cost. So you can't really bargain for those types of things. So we try to balance when we do the rate structures. So that is partly what we're incorporating is in those capital plans, whether it's recreation, wastewater, is incorporating that there most likely is a component of debt servicing within the plans. So it's not always 100% funded by cash, and that would allow some elasticity to account for potential grants that we would receive.
And Director Hiltz?
I hope it's not too much of a loaded question. The stable taxation is the phrase that really catches my attention. And stable, I'm thinking of a curve, not going up and down. But I don't think the board really ever discusses this. You know, what kind of a curve are we looking at? Are we trying to flatten a curve? Are we trying to, you know, this kind of language? So what's staff's interpretation of stable taxation? What would that mean from a operational point of view?
Well, I think planning for the future effectively, so the type of work we're doing in doing these comprehensive service reviews is to create some stability, so some known increases to the rates. So that is part of what's being, as an example, with the wastewater. We're trying to say, look, over the next 3 years, this is what you can expect. Is there more policy work associated with, you know, providing some direction on that? I think most certainly, but I think that's what we're trying to do in conjunction with these very detailed service plans.
So stability also implies predictability. Is that would be implied in that?
That's how I see it.
Okay, yeah, which goes into that 5-year plan, that we're not just this year. We need to look at the other 4 years of the 5-year plan to see if it's stable through those. Okay, thank you.
Hold on to that thought for our next agenda item. Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
Right. On item, page 34, item 4.6.2, each budget cycle, the board will consider the cost of existing services at existing service levels. I would be inclined to add or reducing service levels, comma, before considering enhancements. This is just one of my concerns about our budget process, is that we always assume that we are going to go forward with the same service levels without stopping and thinking about that. In some cases, it's very straightforward, like with transit, but in other cases, it's less straightforward. I don't know how other directors feel about this, but that was kind of my feeling. Can't hear you, Darnelda.
Sorry, it was me who was muted. I was waiting for him to talk. Director Lee, go ahead. Now you're muted.
I put it the wrong way around somehow. Am I? Okay. It's a backwards thing. I was back to that grant thing. I was just wondering if someone did the right thing and accumulated enough money so they didn't have to have a grant. Is that going to reduce the chances of that service actually getting a grant when it's time to replace the infrastructure? In other words, would the grants go somewhere else because you got enough money?
I actually haven't seen that as a case. Most certainly, maybe grantors look if you are financially constrained, but that's not been in any explicit criteria that I've seen as far as eligibility requirements.
Yeah, I guess everyone that's hooked to these wastewater plants are going to have to make some hard decisions pretty soon. So, you know, that's a question that I have in my mind, and I suspect it'll be asked a few times before we're finished. Anyways, when you get 50 years out, doesn't really matter anyways. Not going to be there looking. Thank you.
Okay, Director McMahon, I wanted you to reiterate the number that you were looking at. I'm going to make a list of them if there's others that come forward, and then we'll talk about the amendments. What was the first one you mentioned? It was
34, 4.6.2.
4.6.2. Okay, thank you. Okay, and back to you.
And I was going to say that for the most part, this policy is very straightforward and very sensible, and I really like it. 4.9.1, and I know that staff told us about this before, but we have this policy about undertaking regular reviews of services, and it would just be handy somewhere to have a list of what services have been reviewed when over the course of time, and then if there are services that are sort of in the hopper that we think would merit review down the road, so that we all understand when these reviews have been done. Because the term service review does come up occasionally at the board, and I think we should, all be kind of cognizant. I had one other question. It was just...
Go ahead. Nobody else has put their hand up.
Nobody's loving this. All right. Page 40, our debt servicing costs are limited to 15% of our revenues. And I was just curious, is that industry standard for governments, or is it conservative, or how do we fit in?
That's a good question, and it ties back to the SCRD's debt management policy. And essentially, member municipalities, so as part of the community charter, this is a requirement. However, regional districts do not have to meet these same requirements. That's because we essentially, the uniqueness of the British Columbia's way of doing long-term debt servicing with the Municipal Finance Authority is that essentially a regional district co-signs for our local governments. And so we, under the Local Government Act, do not have those same requirements. However, we have put that into our policy as something for us to measure and to be aware, because if we get above that, then we definitely want to look at our own financial sustainability. So to not have one is probably not a good idea, but to have something there. And again, we report that as part of our debt management report that we provide twice a year as well.
Okay, so I'm going to do a follow-up question to that before I go to the other directors. So if we're limited to 15%, it doesn't indicate in here if that also includes the debt by the member municipalities, or is that only regional district? Or
it's only regional district.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Director Hiltz and then Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and on page 38, it's the 4.14, now 4.15, the rate stabilization funds. I think I understand the concept, but is there any actual funds that are designated as rate stabilization, or are they only reserves that are used for a rate stabilization purpose? So is that a designation? That's, I guess, is that somewhere in legislation, a rate stabilization? Like, it sounds like a big pot of money that's sitting over there we can pull out of it. I don't think that exists. So what, yeah.
So no, we don't have a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So what this used to be, just to provide some context and history, is that when this policy was first adopted, when services would generate a surplus at the end of the year, it would go into accumulated surplus in that specific function. So it would sit in there, and then we transitioned to be more transparent, because that doesn't really, it's very convoluted in trying to articulate that in your financial statements and in your financial reporting. So we then transitioned to putting those funds into operating reserves. So our operating reserves essentially should act as rate stabilization funds. And what's intended for that is when there are one-time projects, things like feasibility, things that are not covered by capital expenditures, then those funds can then be used to fund that. So then we don't create those spikes and valleys as it relates to funding those projects. What you want is to have some foresight into knowing what those projects will be on the horizon. So that's the balance.
Director Lee?
Two things. I noticed the service reviews got brackets non-statutory. Is there a statutory review that does the same thing, and it's something that we can't avoid? Or if you could explain the difference between the two for me?
I'll try to do it very briefly. There are two processes with which a local government, especially a regional district, can undertake a quote-unquote service review. There's one that's statutory and it's legislated, so there are certain things that you have to factor in, and it's overseen by the ministry. And so the last service review we had was between the regional district and the district of Sechelt as it relates to solid waste services. So it's very typically quite costly, and there are certain things that you have to undertake. So that's, and most certainly staff can provide any literature on that particular process. We've provided past staff reports too on the difference between both of them. Internally, things like what we're doing for the comprehensive, what we call asset management plans, which, hopefully will transition to, sustainable service delivery, or, some of the new terms that are in the strategic plan. But that is more of a comprehensive service review as well. Things like what we did for the fire departments too is also would be an example of an internal service review. So fire departments for Sunshine Coast emergency planning, where we hire external consultants. There might be a component of public consultation. You take a look at the legislative framework. Does it match policy framework? That would be an internal review.
So my question was, we're not trying to get around the non-statutory review. We're not being proactive. This is just something we like to do. So we're putting it, we should do, it's good business practice. So we're putting it in the policy. That would be correct.
Yeah, and typically a statutory service review would be if there is some particular components of a service that one participant is disputing, and or wants to be removed out of a statutory service such as solid waste or something of that nature. So again, happy to forward some literature that from the ministry or past staff reports that we've provided on this topic.
Yes, I just wanted to be sure I did have my mind right around it, so that was good. And organization's been spelled with an S, and it kind of driving me crazy. I think it needs a Z. I beat Donna to it.
Any other sections that any of the directors have questions about, or questioning the wording? All right, so the only one that's been put forward is 4.6.2. Director McMahon, would you like to put that information forward again, and we can put it to the board?
Sure.
Or to the committee? Mm-hmm.
So 4.6.2, if everybody's found it, I'm suggesting that we add. Each budget cycle, the board will consider the cost of existing services at existing service levels, comma, or reducing service levels, comma, before considering enhancements.
Right, so that's a recommendation. Would someone like to second that recommendation? Seconded. Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. So, seeing no others, we'll go back to the beginning of the report, and there is a recommendation on page 28. Someone like to make that recommendation? Dr. McMahon. And seconded, Director Kroll, that the recommended policy amendments be approved as presented, or sorry, as amended, I would say then. Right? All those in favor? Thank you. Kudos to staff. I anticipated that when this came forward, I mean, we talked about this at the agenda review, we anticipated there would be a lot of questions, perhaps some wordsmithing, etc. Staff have done a lot of work on this, and it shows in the quality of the questions that came forward here and the minor amendments that have been put forward. So thank you for all the work you've done. On to our next item. Annex E, Community Recreation Facilities Capital Funding Update and COVID-19 Implications, pages 41 through 56. And over to you, Tina. I think. Yes, Tina. Or is Kyle? Who's leading? Kyle's here too, I see. Right?
I'm here, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to pass it over to Kyle Chair, and he has a presentation. There's a lot of technical information in this particular report, and there's a lot of different subtopics within the recommendation. So we're just going to go over some of, Kyle's actually going to go over some of the appendices and kind of what some of these options reflect. And staff are here to take any operational or technical questions that might arise. Thank you. So
thank you.
Off to you, Kyle.
Thank you, Tina. I'm just going to share this presentation.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, it's a bit foreign to me, so let me do this. So the purpose of this report is to present the 2020 update for the community recreation capital funding and the forecasted impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's an annual review process to determine the anticipated capital expenditures over the next 20 years and to determine the necessary funding required to ensure sustainable service delivery. Historically, the funding needs identified from this process have not entirely been satisfied. The attached appendices demonstrate some of the various scenarios explored to meet the board directive of deferring $500,000 in 2021 to fund the 2020 deficit. The capital funding model displays what the anticipated capital expenditures are per year, and each color represents which of the 4 facilities are related to the expenditure. Appendix A on your screen now represents the 20-year outlook under the current funding conditions. This is a continuation of the 2% annual increase and no other changes. The blue line represents the anticipated reserve balance, and the red, brown, or orange line, depending on your screen calibration, represents the anticipated annual debt payment. As you can see under the current funding model, we can expect mounting debt and depleting reserves by the end of this 20 years. Appendix B shows the effects of a one-time reduction in the contribution in 2021 of $500,000. The end result is not dissimilar from the previous slide. However, the reserve balance is depleted sooner and debt accrual begins sooner. Appendix C, if the goal is to reestablish status quo, where reserves are anticipated to be depleted by 2040 and debts are anticipated to exceed the forecast annual contribution amount at that time, a $47,000 increase to the base annual contribution would be required in 2022 and onwards, the year after the reduced contribution. This option is not considered financially sustainable funding strategy due to the large amount of debt associated with it. Appendix D represents staff exploring several strategies to mitigate the impacts from the contribution reduction in 2021. This scenario explores a short-term increase in contributions equal to the initial reduction. As you can see from this graph, again, the end result is similar to the status quo and is not financially sustainable. Additionally, this plan is unfavorable because it causes fluctuations in contribution requests, which may drive undesirable fluctuations in taxation. In Appendix E, consideration was given to increase in the inflationary rate by 0.5%. This plan allows for the same result with no additional contributions required. However, it is considered inequitable, as exceeding the inflationary rate puts excess financial reliance on future contributions and subsequently future taxpayers. Appendix F on your screen now considers the potential impacts of facility retirement. The next two slides illustrate preparations beginning in 2027 for one or two of the older facilities to be retired by 2035. Both of these models are more financially sustainable and are more compliant with SCRD financial policy, but they do not satisfy the desire to provide an equal level of service to future residents. This would be the second one of those where two facilities are retired. These decisions will hopefully be better informed once we receive the results of the upcoming life cycle assessment study for these facilities, which is currently out for tender. Finally, Appendix H. What is apparent from the variety of the scenarios we modeled is that returning to the existing scheduling of funding or something similar to it will result in an inadequate level of funding within the horizon of our capital model. To balance the competing desires, which we see as providing adequate funding, minimizing fluctuations in taxation related to community recreation capital, and to allow for financial flexibility during the uncertain future, staff have modeled a scenario where the revenue that is currently purposed to service debt associated with the construction of SAC and GAC is reallocated to Community Recreation Capital Fund subsequent to the debt's expiration in 2025. This model represents an approximate 2/3 reallocation, or $1 million for 4 years between 2026 and 2029. The end result in this model is projected moderate reserve balance and minimal debt. Based on the analysis, a one-time deferral to the Community Recreation Capital Plan in 2021 to offset potential 2020 operational deficits is achievable. The analysis factors that starting in 2026, funds from retirement of long-term debt can be reallocated to Community Recreation Capital reserves to allow for more sustainable capital renewal funding, as well as to provide flexibility on potential next steps related to the older facilities. Also, per the prior report regarding changes to the board's financial sustainability policy, it is recommended that for 2021, Community Recreation Facilities Capital Plan be transitioned to parcel taxes. This will align funding allocations where operating costs are recovered through property taxes or user fees, and capital renewal or debt financing is recovered through parcel taxes. This would see the capital renewal transferred to parcel taxes by $250,000 for 2021 and by an additional $500,000 for 2022. Property taxes would decrease by these same amounts. The estimated increase to community recreation parcel taxes for 2021 would be $17.15 per parcel. Hopefully this gives some insight, and at this time staff is prepared to take questions.
Thank you very much. Directors, questions? And Kyle, can we have you stop? Okay, hang on. Let's see. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we got Director Ties and then Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair. My thoughts are that if we're going to take on this $500,000 one-time reduction, and we're looking to retire these possibly two facilities in 2035, but we may want to replace them or come up with other solutions that will once again increase our debt loading and our contributions to recreation. I would think that by 2035 we would want our debt levels to be low rather than climbing astronomically. So I would tend to veer towards some of the later options, probably the last one, I guess Appendix I presented there. I have some further questions, but I will leave with some of the other directors to ask theirs.
Thank you. Director Hiltz, Director McMahon, and then I'm going to put myself on the list.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I'm trying to give this title, the report, a little bit different title. Is would this be considered a business case under the financial sustainability model? That's 4.15. So all of this data is essentially, it started with a mitigation strategy from a COVID tax increase. And now it looks like it's a business case for retiring 2 facilities under the idea that it's better to maintain 2 facilities at critical and high, those values, rather than just try to maintain 4 at the critical. So this is about sustainability for 2 facilities. And so this is, so is this a business case? Because we don't use that terminology in reports, but we're supposed to do business cases in debt financing. So is this factor into a business case?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I can start, and Kyle and GM Hall can always jump in. The way I see this particular analysis is that staff were provided some direction as part of the COVID budget scenarios for community recreation as part of the restart. We also already would be reviewing the capital renewal plan in preparation for the upcoming budget. So that was already well underway prior to the recommendation. We just had to pivot what we were doing to contemplate and account for how we could achieve this desired recommendation. So we also have, as stated, direction to do end of useful life of the 2 older facilities. So really this isn't building a business case, but it is providing some scenarios as what the implications to those decisions might be. Because at some point in any type of capital plan or any service plan, you do want to understand what your plan is for older facilities. Do you continue to renew them, or do you business plan for the replacement or a different model? So some of the things that's been discussed in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is, if we were to build a new pool or add a new pool. So those types of things are what you would look at, but first you'd want to understand what your current state is before you drive to the future state. So it's not making a decision, it's really just saying what the implication, but also it positions us financially that when those decisions, if you make them, you're in a financial position to be able to achieve them.
Any follow-up to that? You're good? Director McMahon?
I'm aware that our time is short right now and I'm opening a can of worms, but one of the things that always concerns me about property taxes is that they're not based on people's income. So they're not based on your ability to pay. What, in terms of equity, what is the difference between a parcel tax and regular property taxes? Like, what is more fair?
I don't know if that's a question that can be answered. Tina?
I think there's partly some legislation that outlines some of this. So in the case of the utility fees, when we realigned, they were subsidizing general operations of the service, parcel taxes were. So that's actually not in accordance to legislation. So I think that this proposal for us is just to realign and be more transparent about how you do it. Getting back to your point about the equitability, property taxation or ad valorem taxation is based on assessed values. And parcel tax is a flat tax. So those are the 2 differences. So how you interpret equitability in that particular rationale, I think is open to interpretation.
All right. So my turn. The recommendation as presented on page 41 and what the presentation has been based on came out of previous conversations we've had around how to fund recreation operating costs. I've had this conversation with some of the board members. I've had the conversation with our council in Seashell and with our senior staff there. Up to this point, I think we've all been operating as if COVID is a temporary thing, and that we can pull funding from our long-term focus, basically, and use it for short-term operating. More and more we're hearing that the situation we're in isn't temporary, and that we could be in this situation for the next couple of years. So by actually taking $500,000 away from our maintenance of our facilities now to cover operating, what do we do next year when we may not be back to our previous levels for operating revenue? Do we continue to pull funding from long-term maintenance on these facilities when even the $500,000 we're putting in isn't sufficient to cover the costs that we know we're going to incur? I would prefer to see the $500,000 in there this year, because we don't know how long this is going on, and we cannot continue to take the future committed funds for maintaining our facilities and use them to cover off operating costs. So I'm throwing that out there. I'd like to hear from some of the directors. Director McMahon.
I think it's really clear that we need to have a big community conversation about recreation, the future of recreation, also what it's going to really look like through COVID, because there's still so many unknowns. But in terms of the long term, when we had the recreation referendum, people voted to pay a parcel tax for 20 years. They did not vote to pay a parcel tax indefinitely or forever. And I realized that when you take on infrastructure, it's expensive and you're going to end up paying for it forever. But nonetheless, the degree of informed consent makes me uncomfortable. This is a service that a lot of people do not make use of. Unlike sewage, we all produce sewage and water. We all drink water. But when we get into recreation, we're in an interesting situation where there's a very great range of how much it gets used by individual taxpayers. So I'm finding this hard to grapple with.
Sorry, Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly agree with what you were saying with, we're putting a Band-Aid on a bad situation now, but, all projections are that it's, as you say, the projections are not getting better. And I've always been rather loath to rob Peter to pay Paul. Sooner or later, you're faced with a situation that you've created trying to solve a problem, but as Director McMahon said, there's so much misinformation out there as to how recreation is actually funded. People think it's just one huge pot, and if you have an overage in some place, you can just simply take it from somewhere else. And I think there is a communication component here that needs to come forward. People have a tendency to fall in love with their horse. There was a pool in Gibson's. It's been here for years. People can't understand why it's not open. And it's, it's all part of this communication that we're all struggling with in these times. But I think, as much as I'd like to see us going into budgeting for the next year without, already carrying a burden, I think we have to be realistic. And, combined with communication and a bit of a reality check, I think, we need to deal with, I don't like being sort of negative and pessimistic, but, the future right now isn't looking terribly bright and rosy. To maintain expensive services with limited revenue and everyone screaming, I can't afford to pay my taxes. So, I think it's time for a bit of a reality check.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also struggling with this whole thing. You know, we're hearing a lot from a very vocal minority that understandably wants the recreation centers open, especially the ice users, and of course, you know, it's a Canadian national passion, and it's very difficult to make these decisions on behalf of a largely silent majority. And so I'm struggling with that component of it. But I also agree that I don't think we're in this for 1 year or 2 years. You know, if you look at the Spanish flu, that virus in its mutated form is still with the human population today. I believe that's where we're headed in the long term. We're going for you know, waiting long enough for the virus to mutate to a more benign form, and I think that could be anywhere from 3 to 5 years. I don't really think a vaccination is going to be effective with a continually mutating virus, but that's just my opinion. So I think I also agree that doing short-term fixes, band-aid fixes on something like that is not something that we can do sustainably. And I think that's something that government at all levels is sort of guilty of, is all that short-term thinking is like, well, it'll take me past my time here, and it'll make people happy. But that's not how we should be functioning. That being said, I'm not 100% sure what to do, but I do think that one thing that hasn't been considered here is just because of COVID, maybe we should consider adding more of the burden of having these facilities open to those people using it. And that's, so I would like to come up with some kind of a solution where we do a user fee review, where we can start adding some of the costs to the people that are actually using it, rather than passing it on to the general population.
Thank you. Another piece that is still an unknown is that the federal government has provided money to the provincial governments across the country, and we know that some of that money will be coming out for recreation, for transit, for BC ferries. We don't know the numbers yet. Chair Pratt, I believe, reached out yesterday to our MP's office and got some further information, so she could probably share that. Is that what you're going to talk about, or should I go to Director Hiltz? Okay, so go to Director Pratt, and then we'll go to Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. So as Chair Seegers said, I did reach out to our MP and our MLA, as we had heard that there may be funding coming from for recreation as part of the Safe Restart program, that the Safe Restart program or Safe Restart agreement that the federal government has with the provinces. So this is the information I received yesterday, and it has been forwarded to the board or to directors, and I believe I forwarded it to senior staff. If I didn't, I will make sure I do that as well. BC will receive about $2 billion in federal funding through the Safe Restart agreement, and there's actually, we're just as we're meeting, there was a press conference going on with our provincial finance minister and our premier, and I'm sure there'll be more information coming out today about this, because it's all about funding as well. Right now, there's nothing technically allocated directly for recreation, but there is money for municipalities and transit. For example, $269.7 million to support municipalities. This is for British Columbia alone. and then $540 million to support transit specifically, including TransLink, BC Transit, and British Columbia Ferries services. And then there's funding for previous and planned PPE, childcare support, paid sick leave, vulnerable populations. There's mental health and substance abuse, contact tracing, testing capacity, and then of course a bunch of funding for healthcare as well. Nothing specifically around recreation, and I do know that we're certainly not the only regional district in the province that does provide recreation, but not every regional district does, not every municipality does. So maybe some of the funds for municipalities will be able to be allocated for recreation, but we'll have to wait and see as the details of those programs and funding comes through.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm trying to sort of separate out the various and that's and what are kind of decisions that need to kind of go now. And one of the first and that's is that starting in the 2026, and I'm going to go back to Director McMahon, is that if the voter assent was to pay for this, can you repurpose that payment and redirect it without voter assent? So that's a question on that one, the legitimacy of, we promised you this, and now we're going to take that money and do this with it. Have we received the assent to do that? That's the 2026 piece. The 500,000, the intent would be to reduce the potential taxation for 2021 by about 2.5%. I think that's the intent. So maybe there's staff see that as reasonable. Maybe there's a splitting of the difference in that. And so I guess what pieces of this rely on the model? Like, I'm just trying to, how much of the assumptions of the model tie all of these recommendations together? Or can we pull them out a bit where we're uncertain about what we're going to be doing in the future? So I guess I'm really, what things do we need to decide now? Because the 500,000, I'm going, well, in order to do that, I'd like to see what the whole tax situation is going to be like in 2021. And we won't have that data for months yet. So I'm trying to figure out where we're trying to get before, I don't know where I'm trying to get while I'm making these decisions. That's why I'm trying to see the timeline of where the decisions factor into when we come up to the budget end of March next year. So which ones can we defer, I guess? Or, yeah.
Okay, Tina.
Well, I think most certainly a recommendation could be that, a future consideration be brought forward once year end has concluded. I think there's a lot of unknowns with just recreation facilities opening less than 2 weeks ago. So hopefully by third quarter variance, we'll have very minor indications. Because the projected deficit, as what was recommended, was approximately $835,000 for 2020, but that is left to be that's unknown at this time, the projection. So there are a few components here that can be deferred. I think it's up to the committee's desire what components of these various recommendations they want to put forward for future considerations pending different outcomes or different information.
A follow-up to the piece about the bylaw 550 in terms of repurposing it, which it seems to be what it's doing.
Yeah.
So for this particular one, there's nothing explicit in the bylaw to say that. It basically says, how we're going to fund a service is by these various services. It's not very prescriptive, and we do that most certainly by ensuring we're going to do that. The referendum was more in line with, this is what it's going, what type of facilities do you want? This is what the proposed cost is. Ironically, at that particular time, too, we did go to a referendum for this particular borrowing, and there were some cost overruns, so we had to debt finance short-term almost $2 million through MFA short-term borrowing. So there's a lot of history. So, most certainly funding capital renewal through parcel tax is generally the best practice.
Okay, we are at 2:45. We aren't at a position to actually make a recommendation here. I think we pretty much covered off the various pieces. We're going to have to recess at this point and come back at 3:30 to look at putting a motion forward to direct staff. Do we need a motion to recess? Okay, would someone like to make a motion to recess until 3:30? Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And IT will take care of that on their end?
Yep, switching you to recessed.
Thank you and welcome back. Thank you for your patience while we slipped out and attended another meeting. We are back with the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of September 17th, and we are on Annex E. We've had a lot of conversation, and I think it's time to move something forward. Director McMahon.
I'm going to disappoint you by not. But the second and that says that, and that starting in 2021, the Recreation Capital Renewal Plan be funded through parcel taxes versus ad valorem. I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that, because what that will do is that will shift a bigger tax burden on the lower value properties in my area. And they are already struggling with taxation. At least that's how I interpret it will go. Although Tina might be able to correct me if I'm wrong.
Tina.
What's undetermined right now is what the tax rate is, and comparing those two. So it may not actually be the result of what happens, depending on what the taxation implication is for community recreation. So we would have to convert that over.
Okay, without understanding the implication, I couldn't vote on that at this point, for sure.
Okay, potentially as it's written, right? Okay. Anybody else? And any pieces of this recommendation that is on page 41. Director Hiltz.
Of the ones that, and that's, I would be prepared to go for is actually the parcel tax one, which my guessing is that it's not going to really make a big deal in the difference, just in terms of the amount, in terms of the transparency. That's my thinking that it will be. The $500,000, I'm feeling too early on that. I don't know where we're going. And the 2026, it seems so far away, and making a decision about, and not sure about that one. The funding scenario, I think that might, I'm supportive of that one. So the parcel tax, 1, 2, if we think of 5 lines, 3 and 5, I could be supporting.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Why don't we try doing this? Director Hiltz, why don't you make a recommendation, and then we'll see where it goes, and there may be some amendments that we work with that, but at least we'll get something on the floor. Director McMahon has a point first. Let's see what she has to say.
Wondering if we shouldn't go through them one at a time.
Okay, we could do that.
Just a simple.
To craft it? Definitely. Okay. So the first, and that is around the $500,000 coming out of community recreation facilities capital contributions. Is there anybody that wants that in? Not seeing any hands. Next one. That starting in 2021, the community recreation facilities capital renewal plan be funded through parcel taxes versus ad valorem taxation. Now I've already had one on each side. Sorry, and I think what I'd like to see, and what I'm hearing directors may like to see, is that we need more information on this. So how could we, Tina, I'm looking to you, how would we actually word this so that you go ahead and look at this, but we need to see the implications before we make a decision on it?
So during the break, we kind of staff conferred, and I think before we broke off, I think there was a reluctance to make a decision regarding the unknowns, as these particular mitigate some future unknowns. So one of the suggestions, and I conferred with the corporate officer as well, is that we could refer this entire report as part of the 2021 budget deliberations. As there's really this, we would have to make a decision prior to adopting the financial plan. And then we could bring back, obviously, the parts of the project related to the funding scenarios for the audits for the older facilities will naturally come forward as part of the work plan. So if those come prior to year end or as part of budget as well, those would already come through. So there's no real risk in deferring the recommendations as they sit. The committee could go either way. You could go and amend some of the recommendations and take bits and pieces. That's an alternative as well.
Okay.
In that too, sorry, I didn't answer your part of your question. Then we could come back and we could inform some of these pieces, meaning what would the implication to the ad valorem versus parcel tax be? So rate per thousand. So what would the impact to some of these users that is being questioned, as well as what is the proposed deficit going to be at year end, if it is drastic as we anticipated, if it's far less, and what does the projected 2021 budget look like? So staff are working on that. So there's a lot more information that would help to inform some of these pieces.
Yeah. So if we defer it, where would we defer it to?
Well, I think I would say as part of the 2021 budget. And so what I'm uncertain is I think you'd be best served with year end being concluded. Round one budget deliberations are happening the first week of February. So it would either be at a February committee or as part of round two budget deliberation. So I think saying as part of 2021 budget deliberations, I think, staff would track that and ensure that it came either to a committee or as part of round one or two.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that, we're looking for additional information to inform the decisions here. And staff is going to be doing that work. We don't necessarily need to say, well, we want you to do this. You are doing that work. And by deferring this to the budget process, that information will come forward and allow us to then revisit all of these various options.
Right. I don't think there's any harm in being explicit in a recommendation to say that if the committee's wish is to defer the report and defer the decisions, to be explicit, just for posterity and transparency, to say pending information on implications to parcel taxes versus ad valorem rates. Some of the things that I've heard discussed in the committees. I think it would be good to make sure we understand why the report is being deferred and specifically what we're asking for.
Okay. Director McMahon, over to you.
I'm going to attempt to move that.
Okay.
That we defer this report to the 2021 budget process. Pending information on ad valorem taxes versus parcel taxes.
Okay. Anything else?
Have I forgotten something?
Maybe. We'll see. And one of the other, I'd just say one of the other things that we are waiting on is potential provincial and federal funding.
That's all part of the budget process.
Okay. So there's a recommendation. Director Toth, did you want to second that, or are you looking to add something to that?
I just wanted to highlight that we're not sure that we're going to need to reduce the capital contributions by $500,000 until we see a further financial update. So perhaps that could also be highlighted in the information coming back.
Okay. So we have that pending information on the parcel tax versus ad valorem tax. Did you want to add the other piece to your motion that you're drafting, Director McMahon?
I'm not sure that it's necessary.
Okay. Okay. So we have a recommendation on the floor. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. Any further comments, questions, or amendments to this recommendation? Director Hills.
Can we just run it by one, roughly a repeat, who's Tara's recording, I believe.
Yes, Tara?
Thank you, Chair. And that the Community Recreations Facilities Capital Funding Update Report be referred to 2021 Budget Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting, including further information on the implications to parcel taxes versus ad valorem rates.
Right, Tina, do you need anything else in there?
No, I think that's sufficient. If there's anything between now and when these come forward to the board, then we can recontemplate that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comments before we move this forward for a vote? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you, staff, for your patience with us as we move through this. I know it's a lot of work on your part. All right, we're moving on to Annex F, process for amending established wastewater services, pages 57 through 59. Oh, sorry, back up. Director Ties, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In connection with the previous report, I'd like to make a motion, and the motion is that staff undertake a user fee review to explore adjusting user fees to match our reduced supply facility capacity and having users pay more of the share of COVID-related costs.
Thank you. And is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any discussion? Director Hiltz.
I do have some concerns about the idea that recreation users pay I'm not seeing if it's the whole shot, like if it's a user pay system. Recreation is typically not it's subsidized by the community for the greater good of what recreation brings to the community. So I'm getting the sense that it's almost looking at how to make it a user paid 100% recovery system. And I'm not sure if that's the intent or what. I understand the reviewing of the costs, but I think what we're really talking about is the percentage that we're actually cost recovery of users. That seems to be what the motion or the intent of the motion is getting at, is to figure out what we're going to do with the cost recovery. There's some users can pay more and some users can pay less depending on their ability to pay. So I'm not sure about the intent there.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a little bit my thinking. I'm just and I left it somewhat vague on purpose, just so that staff can basically look at over the coming months which areas are very popular and with our reduced capacity are being filled up, and could maybe use a little bit of a rate increase versus those that are not, just so that basically to optimize our capacity with what the users are willing to pay. It's essentially a classic economic supply and demand kind of thing that I'm looking for. I'm not saying that they should be carrying 100% of the cost. I'm just saying let's have a look at whether there is some options to increase some of the fees to help the average taxpayer reduce some of that burden.
Director Hiltz, rebuttal.
I believe that staff is looking at the COVID surcharges as part of some rate review. I can't remember if there was a recommendation, but I seem to going back some months that there is the COVID surcharge to deal with this during this period. So I'm wondering how this might relate to that piece. I do agree that user rates need to be understood, and we need to understand this cost recovery. I'm just a user rate fee sounds like a fairly substantial body of work to do. So there's a COVID surcharge that staff was, so I guess, is there an update on this COVID surcharge for recreational users?
All right, and staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So the surcharge that was discussed in July as part of restart planning was particularly focused around booking fees, recognizing that we would be moving to a system based on what we had just learned at the time and remains true now, where we can't accommodate drop-ins. We need to have everybody pre-register as part of managing building occupancy and also to support contact tracing. At the time that report was prepared, it appeared as though a transaction fee was going to apply to every single booking, and staff were very concerned about what that would mean for our costs. And since that time, staff have worked with our IT solution provider for registration and optimized a few things such that the impact of that booking fee, which could have been up to $2 per booking, is being managed to a level where staff were preparing to report back as part of our third quarter departmental report that we think that the administration of a surcharge would be more costly than the recovery from it. So on that particular item, staff have done research and we're preparing to report back. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to speak in favor of Director Chai's motion, or his recommendation he's put forward. I think what we're looking to do is have staff look at this. It wouldn't necessarily have to be for budget, but it could be. It could even be added to the work plan for next year to give them the opportunity to allocate time to look at fees should we need to, but based on the evolving situation, be able to come back and give us information to help us inform and impact revenues. Directors. Director Hills.
So the piece of that is when would this happen? So in terms of putting it into the work plan, this fall budget process 2021, that's I'm looking at the chat text, and there isn't anything about a timeline on implementation of the user fee review.
Right, staff? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of the budget process, every year staff do review fees and charges, and so certainly some level of review is contemplated as part of staff's work plan associated with the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I generally support this understanding that we're going to have to be reviewing recreation a whole bunch because there's so many unknowns out there right now that we'll be back to this again, no question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you. We're moving on. Annex F. And this is with regards to amending established wastewater services. And Sherry isn't here. Tina's going to take this. But we may have questions that we'll have to put off for answers. Tina, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is in order to essentially review the legislative process for the wastewater facilities as it relates to changing some of the service. Inside the report, this is very high level. So if there was any specific questions related to a specific local service area, staff would have to come back and confer with the ministry as far as what the recommended process would be.
Thank you. Directors, any questions? Director McMahon? Then Director Hills.
Yeah, this report and the next one are very helpful in getting us along the road to understanding all this stuff. What happens, the report says what happens if the public service is turned over to a strata, but what if it's dissolved altogether? What if the 8 users of Sunnyside decided that they wanted to go it on their own? Would that just require the elector approval of 2/3 of the people in that service, or how would that work?
Is that a Tina question or is that a Sherry question?
So the main crux of the way that the current wastewater bylaws are established is there's a lot of history. So Sunnyside in particular is part of the original establishment bylaw in there. I think there's currently 8 services. There's a little bit of debate about how many services are in there. And so what we would have to do is uncouple that particular service and create independent local services to be able to then dissolve it. So again, if there was a specific local service area that we want to investigate, such as Sunnyside, staff would then take that back, delve into further what the intricacies of that particular service would be and what's desired, and we come forward with a recommendation or, well, a recommended process.
Director McMahon, follow up?
I'm just trying to figure out what the most reasonable next steps are. I think the most reasonable next steps are for Sunnyside to get together and have the conversation and maybe, get an opinion on whether technology has changed sufficiently that it would be feasible for the properties to have their own, or whether they want to keep going on a shared system, which makes the most sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. I think it does sort of untangle the web a bit. Part of that is the questions I have is the funding of a dissolution. I was interested in the early topic about stabilization funds and feasibility, and this is how you get in and this is how you get out. So there's the funding aspect. I wonder who actually owns the asset of the service. Is it the people who put into the service, or is it the SCRD, right? That's just a bit of a question, like who owns the land that these things sit on? Is it SCRD or is it the service? And I guess pulling the trigger on one of these would be very similar to creating a service, the same sort of mechanisms of petition or whatever would be the way to get out. So it's the funding of the disposition, and how do we find out what those assets are valued and who owns them? Like who else can, that I don't know.
Tina?
So essentially, all of the things that Director Hiltz has outlined is absolutely some of the considerations that we would bring back. And it just, I think, highlights all of the different intricacies that would need to be considered as part of this. I would add to this our requirements for, asset retirement obligations. And wastewater facilities most certainly are one that you very much need to consider. So just because someone wants to get out of it, you just can't abandon something like this. You have to ensure you dispose of it in a responsible manner for the Ministry of Environment. So there's a lot of regulators involved in this as well. So that's I think what staff are saying is that Right now, we're speaking of Sunnyside particularly. And so that service in itself would have its own unique things to contemplate. If you talked about a Langdale or a Canoe Road or any of the different other services, they would all be very different.
Thank you. Director Lee.
First of all, thank you for the report. It was very thorough. And feel like I could put one in with all the design things you give me. But my takeaway from this was, yes, if they wanted to take the asset back and run it themselves, they probably could do that with a lot of work on our part. But we can't give it back to them. Once we got it, it's ours. And I think that's basically sums up what I read at it and what I wanted to know about it. In my area, when I asked any of them if they'd like to have it back, they very much understood they didn't want to. It's something they're quite happy to complain about, but also quite happy that we have the headache. So I think it served my purpose, and thank you.
Thank you. Right, seeing no further questions, we're going to move on to Annex G. And again, this is for information. And Kyle, did you want to speak to it, or you just want to take questions?
I think it might be easiest if I'm just here to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Yeah, it was this report in the previous one. It says that if it's over 27,000 liters a day, we take it over. Is that we must take it over, or that we may take it over? Because there are private systems and presumably strata systems that are larger than that.
So within bylaw 320, section 3.2, we have language that states the regional district shall assume ownership and operation of a proposed community sewer system designed to accommodate more than 22,700 liters a day of effluent from residential and non-residential developments, except industrial uses on land zone industrial. So that's the interpretation and the language.
That's under our bylaw. So is it required by the province, or is it required by our bylaw?
That's our bylaw that states that. There is no provincial mandate for us to manage or operate them. There are other factors. Once you get to that size of a wastewater system, they're managed by or under the umbrella of the municipal wastewater regulation, as opposed to the Public Health Act.
I had another question. If a developer came to Elphinstone and wanted to develop 100 teeny tiny lots that could not accommodate their own septic, would we be obliged to approve that and then take over the septic system that then we have to run?
Who would even want to tackle that question? Staff. I get where you're going, right? I get where you're going with this. Remco?
Oh, sorry. I'm so now moved.
You're not going to answer this? Okay.
No, but I think the question is ultimately it's we would not be the approving officer for the subdivision. That will be MOCI. However, we might have something to influence there, but I think we would not have the jurisdiction to finally approve or not approve that subdivision.
Okay, good point. Director Lee, Director Hiltz, and then Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have any of those systems that have over that maximum number, the 22,700 liters, I think it is? I don't think we have any that big, do we?
Yes, we do. Several.
Would Lee Bay be one of them, for instance?
Could very well be. Malibu is another one that I know for sure.
Kyle's nodding as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Director Hiltz.
Thanks. It's kind of actually, I think, the first time I've seen Schedule B, and I see it dates to 1987. So is that the current schedule? I guess is my question. Has it ever been looked at for updating? Like 1987 seems to be a while ago. Any update? And then the other side is that the servicing agreement. And I'm not sure if I'm out of line here, but does YMCA have a servicing agreement? So two-part, the date and age of Schedule B, 1987, and the specific says the YMCA, does it actually have a servicing agreement as required in Schedule B?
And who's going to take that one?
Okay, I will start, and now if Kyle have anything to add, or Tina, please let them. Yes, the version that's currently in front of you is the most current. That's why last year when we brought forward a report on review of bylaws to implement water conservation measures, we also indicated that 320 in its entirety would need a complete overhaul to have it modernized. Yeah, it's really the typewriter era that's still in there. So in terms of the other question, YMCA, I think the answer is no, because it's the plan that we have not formally taken over yet, and we have it of course for Langdale, but not for YMCA, because it's that informal agreement that's still in place that we're currently working towards formalizing, so that we are in compliance with everything.
If I may follow up, so my understanding of Schedule B is before they even built that, they would have needed a servicing agreement in place if they were contemplating SCRD taking it over? No, that wasn't.
No, because they constructed it without considering that we would take it over. We asked them for support when we were not able, when our plant was failing. Then we asked them that we could put our half-treated effluent in their treatment plant, and that's how the two got connected. But initially there was no talk. It wasn't the intent for us to take it over.
Okay.
Okay, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. I just want to circle back to Director McMahon's question regarding at what point we're required to take on these systems. Kyle had answered in reference to our bylaw, but I just want to confirm again, at what point do we have to take them over by provincial regulation? Because I'm a bit confused. I had understood it as that it was a provincial regulation that we had to take them over, or legislation that we had to take them over at a certain time. I didn't realize it was our bylaw that stated that. So I would just like some, just to confirm what level provincially we have to take them over, and what historically the regional district has said, no, we'll take them over at this side. Or at this side.
I remember that. I remember that meeting. Yep.
Yeah, I remember that, and now I'm unclear. So I just want to know provincially, what's the legislation say that we have to take them over at, and or provincially or federal? I imagine it's provincial, but I just want clarity on that, please.
Thank you. Staff?
I can take it over. The Environmental Management Act is the provincial act that regulates environmental management. That's the one that regulates anything over 22.7 cubes a day. It's an SCRD decision. It's an SCRD bylaw that states that we consequently take it over. Yeah, and I agree that in the last several years there has been some confusion about that, but we've confirmed it, and it's our bylaw that's triggering that. Okay,
so by the Environmental Management Act, once it's over 22.7 cubes per day, we have to take it over, but if it's below that...
No, incorrect. Okay. Under the Environmental Management Act, the Environmental Management Act is only applicable to facilities over 22.7,
Okay,
And we made a decision that anything that's regulated under the Environmental Management Act should be managed and operated by the SRD as a local government, given its potential impacts to the environment.
okay. Just in the essence of time, can we add this to a lunch and learn or workshop topic just to understand a little bit more about what our obligations are around this? Because I don't want to go too much into the weeds right now, but this is definitely something I want to delve into a little bit more as a board, just to have a wider understanding of it.
Totally. I think the piece that we need some more clarity on is where is our responsibility as a regional district if we don't take it over and there are issues. Because I think that's the piece that was brought forward before and what triggered us actually putting that in our bylaw. Okay.
We can put it on our list. We'll make sure that will be organized.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director McMahon.
I assume there are systems larger than that were grandfathered, as it were. Poplars comes to mind. That system must be larger than 27 cubes. So I'd be curious about that. I'm also curious about how we align with other regional districts. Like, do they do the same thing? Have they set themselves up to take on all these septic systems? So yes, and everything Lori said, I say.
All right, so we have a lunch and learn that's going to be happening soon. Any other questions or comments in this? And I just want to point out to directors that there is another meeting that we have scheduled for 4:30. So we will need to sign into that one sometime within about the next 10-15 minutes max. Okay, any other questions on this topic at this point? Director McMahon.
Yeah, when we take over a system, do we ask the developer to make a contribution to the long-term capital replacement?
Okay, that can be added in. Director Hiltz.
I couldn't help myself. So the broader review of 320, where is that on the work plan? Then, and the funding of that, is that a budget proposal? What's happening with bringing 1987 up to 2021?
Jim Rosenbaum?
It's currently not in a work plan yet, and earlier today I wrote a note to myself to consider if we would even have the capacity to do that, to start working on that in 2021, to be continued.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we're going to move to new business. Director McMahon.
Sorry, here I was. I get people asking me a lot of questions about staffing at the SCRD, and I find that I am unable to answer any of them. So I would like us to be receiving regular reports, probably as part of the, twice a year corporate services report on industry standard HR metrics. And I'll give you some examples. How many employees do we have? Full-time, part-time, casual. Which departments do they work in? Average length of service, turnover rate, new hires, positions remaining unfilled for more than 30 days, although I don't think there's a lot of that going on right now. Number of active grievances, overtime percentage, absenteeism, and if we have diversity and inclusion targets, how are we doing with them? So I would like to move that a written HR report with industry standard metrics be included in the twice annual corporate services report.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Number of seconders. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Mr. Parker, that one's on your plate. Any other new business that we want to address? All right, I'd like a motion to move in camera, subject to section 91K of the community charter. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And any questions from any of the attendees in the gallery or online? IT, any questions?
Nope, no questions from here.
No questions. Okay, so we will have you move us in camera.
Let me do that.
Welcome back. We have adjourned our in-camera portion of this meeting, and we're back in open meeting. I'd look for a motion to adjourn the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of today. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. See you in the next meeting.